So it's Sunshine Week across America, and here in New Mexico, Attorney General Gary King, will you tell us what government transparency means to you?
Well, to me, it basically means one of the things I've told people is that if you're a government official and you're doing something that you'd be embarrassed to tell your mother about, you shouldn't be doing it. And I really think what that means is that we as government officials should be willing to explain to and show to our constituents, what data we've used to make our decisions, how we've made our decisions, so that they can understand the decision-making process. And I actually think that our constituents understand us better when they understand how we make those decisions. So that, to me, that's the best part of government transparency is having our constituents, have all of the information that they need to understand why we make the decisions that we make.
And certainly you're in the Attorney General's office now, but when you were in the legislature, you were instrumental in helping to develop the Inspection of Public Records Act, correct?
I was the primary sponsor both for the what I call the modern Inspection of Public Records Act and the modern Open Meetings Act, both of those in 1993, I think. And we've had a Public Records Act as far back as the 50s, but that the original Public Records Act just defined what a public record was. It didn't talk about the accessibility of those or anything else. And so 93 was when we created the concept of a public records custodian for every agency, so that every agency had to have a person who had the responsibility of making those public records available to members of the public.
And one of the things that your office has done is take training to different state agencies across the state in a roadshow kind of format and teaching officials how both the Open Meetings Act and the Inspection of Public Records Act works.
Sure. We try every month to go to communities around New Mexico to do training for the local elected officials and state officials who are there, and we do a training usually at least once a year in Santa Fe and in Albuquerque as well. We also do specialized trainings for police agencies and other folks that have some specific issues. But yeah, one of my goals is to make sure that all of our elected officials are knowledgeable about what their obligations are under the Inspection of Public Records Act.
How many IPRA or Open Meetings Act violations have your office filed lawsuit against because of noncompliance in New Mexico?
The number of lawsuits is fairly small. We were involved in one lawsuit last year, but we get complaints probably 3 or 4 a week. That varies. Most of those we're able to solve by sending a letter to the public body and explaining to them what we think that they've done wrong. Actually, the first thing that we do is we send them a letter that says, here's the complaint that we have. We'd like to hear your side of the story to find out, what you're, because we think that they're entitled to their side of the story too. And then, I have lawyers here that do the analysis. If there's been a violation, we notify the agency, and 9 times out of 10, the agency will respond by curing the violation. And so we don't have to file a lot of lawsuits because people understand that we will file a lawsuit if there's not. Now there are some notable exceptions, and we may talk about them some today, but I think that all of us, including my office, tried for some period of time to get Governor Richardson to give some documents that people were looking for, and he and his lawyers utilized a variety of let's say tactics with regard to the Public Records Act to either delay or not respond to a public records request, some of which were valid reasons to delay or not respond, some of which may not be valid reasons. I think that would have led to a lawsuit, but with the governor leaving office, it probably became moot by the time we could file a lawsuit.
So were you pleased to hear then Governor Susana Martinez, who replaced Richardson here at the first of the year, on the very first day issue an order saying that executive privilege would not be used on a regular basis or only in a rare case?
Mm-hmm. No, I thought that was good because, of course, one of the issues that we did involve ourselves in a lawsuit against one of Governor Richardson's agencies was an issue of where he claimed that exception, and and we didn't believe that executive privilege applied there. I think that there is a theory of executive privilege in New Mexico. I personally advised the governor that that was not a case where executive privilege applied, and that's why we joined that lawsuit on the other side. And the courts found in our favor in that suit. So I think that it is wise, and of course Governor Martinez is a lawyer, so I think that she understands, the narrow perspective of executive privilege, and I thought that her order to agencies that said that they could not use executive privilege as a blanket exception was a good move in her part.
So just earlier last week, the New Mexico Supreme Court and the Chief Justice wrote a pretty strong opinion that the public has right and access to government documents, even if it's requested anonymously through a third party. Have you had a chance to read his opinion yet?
Well, I haven't. I've been myself preparing for and arguing a case in the U.S. Supreme Court last week, so I haven't had a chance to see what our Supreme Court has been doing. But I agree with that philosophy, and certainly, I hope that we will continue to get a good series of decisions from our courts, so that people will understand when we do the training, here are the parameters, that set out the requirements of the Inspection of Public Records Act.
In your bottom line assessment, IPRA is what for the public?
Well, it's once again, it's an opportunity to access documents that are generated. Our definition of public records is one that sets out all of those things that we in the state do to do business with each other, to do business with the public and such. And we talked about transparency originally. I mean, it is the mechanism by which we have transparent government. And so, once again, I think that by and large, that elected officials make good decisions based on valid reasons, and that they shouldn't be afraid to give those documents to the public so that they can analyze and see why they made that decision. They might still not always agree with us, but
during the campaign, you hear buzzwords like transparency and accountability.
Yeah.
Doesn't IPRA really get to the mechanics of holding government officials accountable?
I think that's very true, and one of the things that people should continue to be aware of, and we make people aware of this, is that if they feel like the government is not accountable, IPRA also includes a provision so that you can be like a private attorney general. You can enforce IPRA by going to court yourself, and if you win, you get reimbursed for your costs and such. So I think that people have to do the same analysis that I do and see if they think that they have a case that has merit. But certainly, there some of the other cases that have been important cases in New Mexico in the last couple of years have been brought by press organizations or by private individuals who were enforcing the Inspection of Public Records Act. And frankly, I'm aware of one case from a few years ago where there were significant penalties that the court assessed.
It was with the private
agency.
investigator. The
Right.
state paid over $117,000, and then on top of that, maybe another $31,000 in legal fees.
In legal fees, yeah. And so it's a powerful tool to be able to do that. And of course, a lot of people would prefer, for instance, that our office take care of those issues and bring lawsuits and such. But in some cases, I will say that in the case up in Farmington, where the newspaper brought a suit, they were able to steer that suit in a direction that they wanted to do, in a time frame that they wanted to do. And so, like I said, once again, there was a very powerful tool for them.
In your view, what is the most important transparency, accountability, open government bill before the legislature this year? And have you sponsored any yourself?
Well, see, it's in that case, it's sort of a question that begs the question, because indeed I have a bill that we've introduced a number of times to improve what we call the teeth in IPRA. We're trying to add criminal penalties for knowing violations of IPRA, which might deal with some of those issues where a public official is reticent to give up the document and they know that they're supposed to give up the document. That bill was a little bit better early on when we introduced it, because it actually had felony penalties for knowingly destroying a document after it's been requested, so that you don't have to give it up. That actually has been taken out of it, amended out of the bill this year. So we still have the penalties for not complying with the law, but I thought that a very severe penalty for destroying a document would have been a great tool.
Or what about just withholding a document and not?
Well, frankly, right now it's not any kind of a criminal act to withhold a document knowingly, and that bill I think might very well pass this year. I think that there is some pressure. We've introduced it, I think, every year since I've been the Attorney General, but we are. I think with the new legislature, we're having a little more luck at moving that bill through the system. So we're hopeful to get these criminal penalties. The Open Meetings Act has criminal penalties, and they've only been applied once or twice, but they're there, and I think that once again gives a very powerful tool to enforce the act. But our goal in the Attorney General's office is not to ever have to get that far. Our goal is to have public officials who are well educated and who understand their responsibilities under the act. And frankly, they don't have to know everything. I have lawyers on staff that are available at any time to consult with public officials, so that if they have a question as, does this comply with the Open Meetings Act, does this comply with the Inspection of Public Records Act, they can call us and we'll give them advice on how to comply. And if they're not complying, we'll actually give them advice on how to cure their noncompliance. And so, as I've said, I think one of the reasons why you're not seeing a lot of lawsuits is because the Attorney General's office continuously works with local government units to make sure that they are complying with the act.
Shifting gears just a little bit,
Sure.
SB 18, Senate Bill 18, would allow your office the right to pursue more fraud cases, but it appears to be stalled in the legislature. Do you know who stalled it, why it's tabled, and what's going to be happening here in the last week of the legislature with it?
Well, I sat next to the Attorney General from New York at our AG's meeting recently, and so we had some discussions about what tools we have to do that, and our SB 18 was a tool that has similar power to what's called the Martin Act in New York to pursue securities fraud, and it is a very powerful tool. It is a somewhat controversial tool because it does not require that you prove criminal intent for certain bad acts under the Securities Act in order to get a conviction, or not any specific criminal intent. You have to prove general intent for any crime. So that bill got tabled in the first committee where it was assigned in the Senate. I don't believe that there was even a public hearing on the bill, and so we were discouraged by that. But it would be beyond me to say sort of why or how the senators decided to do that.
It's needed this year, especially there are those out there that contend that the Attorney General's office needs a little bit more muscle through this bill to be able to look at things like, State Investment Council issues.
Well, one of the really powerful tools there that's not controversial, I don't think, is it's not controversial in my office anyway, gives the Attorney General's office significantly broader subpoena powers to look at financial records in cases where the state has securities investments. And so, it would allow us to look at bank records and wire transfer records and those kinds of things. That's a very powerful tool that they have in New York. And so we have some similar concepts in a couple of other bills that we have moving through the legislature, although I think that they're all tabled right now too. And I think that that when the Attorney General's office asks for more authority to look into people's financial dealings, I understand that the legislature would want to look at that carefully, but we are, wondering why they would criticize me on one hand for not being more aggressive about going after these criminal acts, but then wouldn't give me the tools that I need to be more aggressive.
And certainly, legislators and lawmakers are becoming more aware of openness and government accountability and transparency. Mm-hmm. Is there resistance to SB 18? They're worried that it gives you too much power and might be hitting a little bit too close to home. Mm-hmm. Is that the resistance?
I don't know about too close to home, but I think that in New Mexico that we have always had, the tension between the executive branch and the legislative branch as to who's going to have, be the powerful branch. And I think that that Governor Richardson really pressed hard to make the executive branch a more powerful branch, and in some ways that generated some friction between the executive branch and the legislature. Now I am not, even though I'm part of the executive branch, I don't work for the governor. But I think that that there is some reticence in the legislative branch to give broad powers to the executive branch unless they understand how they're going to be used. And so I think that's the philosophical battle that we fight in the legislature when we try and increase our powers in this area.
Just two more questions, because I know you're a busy guy. Has the memo of understanding with the HSD group and helped with the Attorney General's be able to get a flow of data between the Medicare Fraud Division and the Elder Abuse? And do you know now if DOH and HSD are sharing Medicaid program data with members of the public or a media request?
I know that there was a sort of a dust-up between my office and HSD over the sharing of data between our offices and my Medicaid fraud group. That has certainly improved, and of course the new governor has just barely had a chance to get her cabinet secretaries in place, and so I think after the legislature's over that we'll have another meeting there, and we've just recently had some changes in my Medicaid fraud group as well. So that gives us an opportunity, I think, to sit down and work out any other wrinkles that we have with regard to sharing data. But my Medicaid fraud group has been much more aggressive at pursuing lawsuits and criminal lawsuits in cases of Medicaid fraud. And that flow of data is certainly helpful in making that happen. So I think that there's more to do there. With regard to sharing of information between two other executive agencies, I don't really know off the top of my head whether that's going well or not, so because I haven't been involved in those discussions.
So what is your hope or your goal for that this year?
Yeah. Well, I think that depending on budget issues, that we intend to continue to ramp up our criminal processes with regard to Medicaid fraud, and we're looking to hire another lawyer right now, maybe two more lawyers in that agency to pursue those, and some more professional staff, and so I think that the interaction between my office and those agencies that have the data, Human Services and Health Department, we'll see how rapidly that flow can go as we move through more cases, but I certainly expect it to be good.
Good, and I hope we can check in with you, later after some of this
Of
develops
course.
and continue to follow it.
Of course.
And then, speaking about ramping up criminal prosecutions, what are the barriers across New Mexico with law enforcement agencies and or prosecutors to use this human trafficking provision that you spend a lot of time training, but it's my understanding it's only been used twice?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not a barrier in utilizing the act. The barrier is in the kind of victims that we're searching for in the human trafficking statute. They're particularly vulnerable victims, but they're also victims who are particularly reticent to come forward and testify or even approach a police officer on their own, because they've been told, if you talk to the police, we're going to kill your family, we're going to kill you. So they're very intimidated kind of victims and witnesses. So one of the things that we've been doing over the last year and a half or so you might call this a barrier and us breaking down the barrier, but is we've trained 2,000 law enforcement officers in New Mexico to recognize the victims without having the victims have to come to them and self-report. And we have also in the past year or so generated brochures that are available in locations throughout the state where we think that victims might be, because they do probably, maybe they go grocery shopping or something. So we have brochures that are available to retail outlets so that just the public can look at those brochures, see how they might be able to recognize the victims of trafficking and report those too. So the real problem with us is getting the crimes reported. The law has been very powerful. Actually, in one case there's already been a guilty plea. In another case, we'll have to work it through the system, but it certainly is possible that there will be guilty pleas. And
But still, while the public is learning to recognize it and police are learning to recognize it, to be able to maybe approach a victim and it's, ascertain, the facts of their case.
Sure.
It's only been used against 2 pimps right now.
That's correct. And, but that's not to say that those are the only investigations that are ongoing, but of course our office doesn't talk about ongoing criminal investigations.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Sure.